Hello, global gardeners. It's a happy gardening Monday. So great to have you here today. Always look forward to this. Bonjour to Jean-Pierre in Belgium. Nice to have you here as you're moving into your evening. And good morning to Bettina in Eastern Ontario, Canada. Always nice to have a pleasure to see you. And Donna Stevens, good afternoon in Bonnie, Scotland. Want to say thank you right up front to our wonderful moderators, Jay and Heidi, representing Canada and the United States. So we're starting off with just a load of wonderful gardeners from literally all over the world. And today we're going to be talking about plants. Can you ever have too many? Is this a syndrome that even exists, that we have too many plants? Well, I think there are appropriate situations for each of us as to what the right number happens to be. And that's what we'll be chatting about today. I look forward to your inputs. One of the things that I was thinking about yesterday, I came up with the idea for this a few days ago, but yesterday I was on the live stream with Joe over at Garden State Gardener channel. And I think I am growing a lot of chili peppers this year. I started some seeds last week. I already had started my super hot chili peppers about 3 weeks ago. If they all sprout, and so far germination has been really good, I will have almost exactly 100 chili pepper plants this year. 100. For me, that's a lot. I've grown that many before, but not often. This year, because I want to grow a lot of peppers, 100 seems about right. In talking with Joe last night, he's growing 600 pepper plants. I can't imagine that. I don't have, well, I guess I technically do have space if I didn't grow anything else. But the idea for me to grow 600 pepper plants is just atmospheric. I can't even adequately imagine what that would look like in my garden. But to Joe, it's just another gardening season. So how about you? How many peppers are you growing? 600, 100, 2? Whatever that number happens to be that you feel comfortable with, I think that's a good number. If you think you should have grown more at the end of the season, well, then you modify for next year. If you think you should have grown less at the end of the season, then you can modify next year. And this is where the question really comes in. The answer to how many plants are too many will differ from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, because often as we're starting our seeds, either indoors or outdoors, we have grand aspirations for what our garden's going to look like. And it isn't until we've taken care of that garden, the weeding, the watering, the pruning, the harvesting, all of it. It isn't until we get to the end that we have an adequate measure for us individually of how much is too much. And so I'm certainly not in a position to compare my garden with yours and to tell you whether you're growing too much or not enough. But hopefully as we progress through this discussion today, you'll get some ideas of how you can figure out what that number should be. Good morning to Jordan Marie Organics. We are only growing to plant 8, but I always sow more seeds to account for lack of germination. I give away or sell extra points. I'm so glad that you brought this up. It's exactly the way that I approach gardening as well. And I think the reason we run into the potential problem of having too many plants. Often you'll see it recommended that if you're growing anything, tomatoes, peppers, squash, and if you're starting them either indoors or outdoors, you choose the spot for that plant. And then you put in 2 seeds or 3 seeds with the assumption that you're not going to get germination. And so the idea of overseeding, putting too many seeds in the ground, is one that most of us practice. The assumption, however, that you're not going to get germination, I think is a bit of a myth. The germination rates from almost all seed companies need to be, sometimes by regulation, greater than 90%. For a seed company to stay in business, they need to make sure that their seeds are germinating. The companies that I've visited and the ones that I've looked into, they all have germination rooms where they're testing their seed on a regular basis before they sell it to the public. And so the assumption that we need to double the amount of seeds that we're sowing just to get the number that we're after really means from the beginning we're growing twice as many plants, because you can expect just about everything to germinate. Now, these super hot peppers that I started last month or beginning of this month, they are notoriously bad at germinating. There's just one of those things about the super hot chili peppers that you see a lot of videos, and when you see my video, you'll actually see how simple it is. But you'll see videos that say you need to soak the seeds in tea, and you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you need to have all the conditions perfect because they're not going to germinate. And then you need to give them time because it may take a month for them to germinate. Well, I'm here to say that those seeds I got from Pepper Joe's had an incredibly good germination rate. I had about 90% of what I planted, a little bit more than that. Some of the varieties, I started 4 seeds and I got all 4 seeds. A few of the varieties I planted 4 seeds and I got 3 seeds, or 3 seeds that germinated. So overall, it was close to 90% germination. But it all happened within 2 weeks because I put the seeds in like I always do. I used the heat mats like I always do, and the germination was great. I started 4 of each of those plants thinking that I would only get 2. And so now I've got twice as many super hot chili pepper plants than I had originally planned for. And so now what am I going to do? I've got 30 of these super hot chili pepper plants. I was planning for 15, hoping for 20, and now I've got 10 extra plants. I've already started talking to friends and family to see if any of them want to grow a super hot chili pepper plant, and none of them do. And so to Jordan Marie Organic's point, I like to give away my plants when I have too many, but what happens when you can't give away those plants that you grow? That happened to me last year, where I had, again, overseeded, grew more plants than I had planned for, and tried to give them away. Well, too many of those plants ended up in my compost pile, and that's just painful to kill a plant that you spent all that time growing. So let's share some thoughts on that. I like the idea of giving plants away. I encourage you give your plants away, but have you been in that situation where you tried to give them away and couldn't? We started a plant sale at my garden club last year, and we'll be doing it again this year. And right now, that's my fallback. If I can't give away the plants that I want to, I'm donating them to the garden club for our plant sale. And there's a pretty strong likelihood that someone will buy those plants. It's a great fundraiser for the company, but not everybody has that option with a fallback of that kind of thing. So something to think about. Anna L says, my tomatoes seem like they have 120% germination rate. I really tried to restrain my sowing lust. That's a good way to say it. Yeah, that's so true. And I can't think of a recent year that I had less than 100% on my tomatoes. And you're right. I always end up with more tomatoes than I germinate. And so typically I'll put 2 seeds in a cell and both seeds germinate. And then suddenly when it comes time to pot up to the next level, I'm finding 3 plants in each of the cells. So it's too often that an extra seed falls in. And so having 120% of your germination is actually not out of the ordinary, I think, because as we put the seeds in, they just tend to get more and more as those errant seeds find a home. I'm growing a whole bunch of basil this year. You'll see a video on that that's coming up. I'm going to fill one of my green stock towers with nothing but basil, all kinds of different types of basil. Well, basil is very small seed, and even though I started each cell with the intent that that cell corresponds to one of the pockets on my green stock, and each of those cells is only going to have 2, maybe 3 plants when I am growing in my green stock. When you sprinkle the seeds, try to get 3 little teeny tiny seeds in one individual cell. So all of my basil has sprouted, of course. Germination has been 100%, it seems, at least. But some of those cells now have 10 or 15 little plants growing in them. And so my 100% germination rate is easily 700 or 800% because of that overseeding. And now I've got to go back and clip, prune, snip, pull, but get rid of those extra basil plants as they start growing, because too many plants in one individual cell, they're robbing each other of the nutrients. So you've got to get down to the single strongest or 2 strongest, depending on the size of your pot. And I just hate killing plants. I've killed thousands of plants over the years, of course, but this is killing plants on purpose, and it's just painful. So what do you think about that? Greg Daner says, I'm very curious to know what you're going to do with all that basil. So I do this most years with my basil. I love pesto. I love, on the spur of the moment, trying to figure out what I'm going to do for dinner, and grill up a chicken breast, make a nice little cream sauce, and put that over my noodles. But that's what I do in the days when I don't have pesto, because it's so much easier and often better to have that same thought. Oh, I think I'll do some pasta tonight. And I grill up that chicken breast, but instead of making a cream sauce, I just reach into my freezer, pull out some of the pesto that I've made, melt it over the noodles, and I have dinner. So I use a lot of pesto, and I freeze it into little individual serving sizes so that I can throw it into the pasta and then put some nice Parmesan Reggiano on top of it, and dinner is served. I also like using pesto on bread. So I'll have a steak or pork chop or whatever I'm eating that has a nice grilled piece of bread, and I just spread pesto on top of that, put it underneath the broiler for a couple seconds, and have a pesto garlic bread. So that's what I do with all that basil. And also, probably, you can expect, maybe I'll talk about this in a future video, but I'm making a lot of these things to give away. I give them to friends and family and neighbors, typically at the holiday season. But have you ever gotten a jar of pesto fresh from the garden from a gardener? I doubt it. That's what I want to do this year, is give away some little half-pint jars of my pesto, because I'll have so much of it. So there's some ideas, Greg. That's what I'm planning to do with all that pesto. Plus, I love eating it fresh with tomatoes in just a simple salad. To put basil in your salad, I do the same thing with mint. Just however you have your salad, a green salad, throw in a couple mint leaves or basil leaves that you do a chiffonade. You cut it into really thin slices and then put it in. Oh, it really raises your salad to a new level. So there's my plans for basil, and I also just want to see what it looks like to have a tower of basil growing on my deck. So Bohemian Herbology saying dark opal basil make the prettiest vinegar. Thanks for the preservation tip. That's a good idea. I'm actually growing some of the purple basils, which is why I want to see the tower as it's growing. And I haven't done a lot of vinegars in the past. I've done garlic vinegars and thyme vinegar and rosemary vinegar, but I like that suggestion. I haven't done basil vinegar, so I think I'll add that to the list. Why not? I've got a ton of basil growing. And so, is that too much basil? I'm going, so each of those those tiers on the green stock is 6 of the pockets. And the one I'm going to be using, I think, is 5 tiers high. So I've got 30 of those pockets to put plants into. And I'm planning on putting 3 basil plants per pocket. So we're talking close to 100 basil plants. Is that too many? Well, it is if you don't have a plan. If you decide that you want to grow 100 basil plants and you've never preserved basil and you don't eat fresh basil with mozzarella and tomato and you don't turn your basil into a pesto, then yeah, you're probably wasting your time and, more importantly, your space in the garden to grow that many plants. But if, like me, you have a plan for what to do with the harvest, I may get to the end of the season and think that 100 basil plants were not enough. And maybe next year I'll grow more. That's why I say what you think at the beginning of the season will change at the end of the season. And I always like to have a plan, you know that. The plan will dictate what that start looks like. Well, the plan is always evolving, and next year's plan is going to be different. So halfway through the season, if I'm not having the success with the basil or not using enough of it, I still will have time to pull out some of those plants. Perish the thought. I don't think I'm going to do that. But the point is, if you start too many plants and you get into the season and you recognize that you have too many plants of whatever it happens to be, it's okay to pull some of those plants and put something else in their place. Because I think that's the biggest disadvantage of growing too many plants. You're doing that at the expense of a different plant, and you might like that other plant better. And I've done that. Not every year. I do try to follow my plan, but occasionally I did that with turnips this last year, actually. I grew a lot of turnips, and about halfway through the season, I just was tired of turnips. And I realized that I wasn't going to use the turnips that I was growing. So I pulled the turnips and then put other plants in their place, primarily cilantro and peas and beans in that same spot, rather than getting to the end of the season and then saying, yep, I knew it. I was growing too many turnips and I missed out on the opportunity. Well, I acted. It's hard to change a plan like that midstream and pull up plants that you were planning on, but it's okay if you recognize that it's just not working in that particular moment. Francis is talking to Riverdale Gardens, but I'll go ahead and throw in a comment as well. Garlic scapes, I think, are the reason I grow garlic. Love them in a simple stir fry or any other way. Completely agree. I actually have a video. It's one of my older videos. It's from about 4.5 years ago, where I make garlic scape pesto. Again, I love pesto. This year it's going to be basil pesto. But in the past, I've made pesto with the garlic scapes. And I agree with you. If you grow a hardneck variety of garlic and it sends up that scape, don't think of that as something you cut off and throw in your compost pile. That is something you cut off and you use in stir fries, or like me, my preferred method is in a pesto. So absolutely, we have a lot of plants like that when we look at too many plants, those plants that have multiple purposes, go ahead and shift your mindset as to how you're using the plants as well. I love beets. I love growing beets. Golden beets have become my favorite. I've mentioned that in the past as well. Well, the beet root is the reason I'm growing those plants. But the beet leaves are delicious. Sauteed or raw in a salad, the beet leaves are just really hard to beat. So when you're growing, why are you growing in the first place? And if you start getting into that point of, man, I've got way too many beets in my garden, well, maybe you can shift your focus from the roots to the leaves, or the leaves to the roots, and change what the harvest is all about. And so if half of your beetroots are being grown and you're harvesting all the leaves, and the other half of your beetroots, you're leaving all the leaves on to get as big a root as possible, that's okay as well. Now you essentially have two different crops. the beet leaves and the beet roots. And instead of having too many of one, you've got just the right amount of both. So how you look at your plants can really help answer the question whether you have too many or maybe not so much. And Anita is definitely saying beet greens are so good. I made a video also about 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, where I fermented my beets. Beets are incredibly delicious fermented. And I had harvested the beet root and was planning on using the greens, but got busy. They sat in the refrigerator. Then I had to get everything set up for the video and start fermenting the beets. And so by the time I used those beets, the greens were all wilted. And I'm not a big fan of wilted beet leaves. So as I made that video, I cut off the tops and I said, these tops are going in the compost pile. I didn't say they're going in the compost pile because they're too wilted and that's not the way I like my beet leaves. Oh man, I got a ton of comments from people saying, don't throw them in the compost, eat them, the beet leaves are delicious. Yes, they absolutely are, but I prefer mine a little crunchier and a little fresher. And so don't hold it against me that I'm composting my beet roots or beet leaves, depending on what your preferred method is, because they are delicious. I do agree with you on that. So Frosty Lone Wolf says, I think I can have too many plants. And that's why I'm asking the question, because we should all ask ourselves this question. Can you have too many? So many of us, and I get comments like this a lot as well. It's like, oh, I can never grow enough, fill in the blank. I can never grow enough tomatoes. I can never grow enough peppers. I can never grow enough onions. I can never grow enough broccoli. Well, what is enough? Why are you growing it? If you're growing for the purpose of eating it, feeding your family, can you eat that same thing every single day? I ran into that issue. I talked about it in the recent video when I say what I'm not growing this year. I had yellow squash coming out my ears last year. I had so much yellow squash that I just couldn't handle it anymore. So yes, absolutely, I grew too much. I freeze dried it. I tried every method of cooking I could imagine, and I still had too much yellow squash. Those are the kind of questions you have to ask yourself. If you can have too much of what you think is a good thing, and if the answer is yes, now you can help set the limit for how many plants are perfect or ideal for the spot in your garden where you're growing those plants. And then open up the remaining space to something else. I think variety is so important in the garden, and we tend to get focused on those primary plants that we're growing. And yes, we grow too many of those plants when we could throw something else into the mix and really have a possibly more enjoyable season because you discover that new thing that is happening. Brett Lee says, from my gardening experience thus far, I feel if you have a plan and purpose for every plant and it's not wasting, then all is good. And yeah, absolutely. The plan is important. It's when the plan goes awry and you end up with too much. But the plan helps you avoid having too many plants. And especially if you plan for 6 and then recognize that there's the possibility that the plants are going to do better than you expect, so really only do 5, I think that may end up being a better way to approach your general garden plan. So like I said, I planned for 15, maybe 20 of my super hot peppers, and now I've got 30. Well, that's actually a good problem to have. I would rather plan for 20 and then get 30 than to plan for 20 and only have 10 seeds germinate. And so go ahead and plan high, aim big, but then you can pare back what actually makes it to your garden, and you can stick with your original plan. So that's what I'm trying to juggle right now. My plan was 15 to 20. I've got 30. Now I've got to figure out which of those 30 I'm actually going to put in my garden. And it's so tempting. It's so tempting to put all 30 of those super hot pepper plants in my garden. But if I do, it's at the expense of something else. And there are a lot of other things I want to be growing this year. So yes, it's going to be painful to give those plants away, or try to find someone to give them away to, but it's okay. That's what we gardeners do. And as long as I stick with my plan, it's actually going to end up being okay. And I think that's an important aspect as we approach this. Cass Makes Stuff is saying, I'm hoping that my garden will be more productive this year. Planning to do some irrigation stuff in the hopes it'll help. Good luck. It should. Still not used to how crazy dry it can get here compared to Massachusetts. And so that raises a good point in general. When you move to a new area, you were raised in one area, and then you set up your adult life in a different area and you start gardening, and you recognize that things can be completely different. And like here in Colorado, where it's just hot and dry and windy and a challenge all summer long, it is hard compared to a lot of other areas that seem to have it so easy. Irrigation is an important aspect of that. The soil and having all the organic matter is also another important aspect of that. But choosing the right kind of plant fits into that mix as well. And so that's a problem I've found that I've had over the years. Because it's so challenging here in Colorado, when I find a plant that does well, I tend to overdo it. I tend to grow more of that plant because I know it's going to do well, and I like to have that gardening success. But variety really helps, at least for me, make gardening more enjoyable. And so, Cass, go ahead and do the irrigation. Hope it works well for you. Try to find those plants that do best for you in a challenging environment, and then branch out and grow fewer yellow squashes and more super hot peppers, or whatever your specifics are for the year. And hopefully that'll make a big difference as we move forward. And so, this is another issue that I think is important as well, that Gina McGregor says, if you don't have enough gardening friends to give your spare plants to, maybe join a gardening group. Absolutely. I talked about that in a recent live stream as well. And the garden club that I have with the plant sale in the beginning of summer is a great opportunity. And that's what we do, is we share our plants first among our group, and then we sell them to anyone that wants to come and help donate to our group. But a gardening group of whatever type, be it a garden club or even just a coffee clutch of some friends you get together with and talk about gardening, it's a great way to give away your plants. And I've got some good gardening friends, and we share plants every year. And yes, it's the extras that we grow, but I grow extras for that reason, to give to my friends and family. So I always encourage that you find a group to share knowledge with and to share your stories with. And in this case, yes, absolutely, share your plants with them. And that's a great way to keep moving the enjoyment of gardening forward. Glad to have you here today, River and Dale. When I run out of room in my garden, the peppers are the ones I move to containers because they do great in pots. There's your option. I like that idea. If, like mid-season I was talking about, you find out that you've got too many plants in a particular bed, containers can be an option for many plants. Doesn't work with everything, but peppers are easy to repot and they bounce right back. And so absolutely, go ahead and put your peppers in your pot. Or at the beginning of the season, and this is what I'm starting to analyze right now with some of those peppers I have, is to actually put them in the pots in the beginning. And so the 15 super hot chili peppers that I was planning on putting into my garden, I'm thinking about adding to them 5 of the same peppers in pots. That gets me to that 20 plant target that I had, with some of them growing in beds and some of them growing in pots. Absolutely an option for some plants to move from garden beds into pots. But if you recognize you've got too many in the beginning, throw in some of the fabric grow pots, put some terracotta pots, do some 5-gallon buckets, whatever you've got. Go ahead and start there. That's an easy way to expand your garden growing space without having too much of a headache and too much concern. So good suggestion as far as using pots for some of that overflow problem. Hey, Prepper Chris, nice to see you here. Always nice to see you on a Monday. Thank you for that contribution. Can you replant a celery stalk and get a new one? Yes, often you can, as long as you've got the basal cells at the very bottom that are where the roots grow. Most of the celery that you can even buy at the store, or if you grow it yourself, will regrow. It can take time. It needs to have the right conditions and the right nutrients, but you can actually see videos that show people growing their new celery stalks from what they grew or what they bought at the grocery store. So yes, you can actually have some fun with that. Suggest taking that celery and putting it into water to start with. Now the key is that a single celery stalk is probably not going to grow into a plant unless it was removed and still has the root portion attached to it. That's the key part. It really needs to have that bottom piece with those cells that can grow. And if you like celery, go ahead and buy a bunch of celery with all of the stalks. Just chop the stalks off close to the base, and it's that base that you put into water, and roots will develop, and you can expect some new stalks to shoot up over time. So it's fun. I actually started making a video doing that, and I'm all about the visuals when it comes to the video. And so the celery stalk I started with was a really nice light green color. That's the celery I like. And then when I started growing it in water like that, it turned a really dark green. I'm not sure why, but it just didn't look like regular celery. So I canceled the plan for that video because it just didn't look right. So I'm going to try it again here in the months ahead, and maybe you'll see a video about it. But I do want to make a video about growing celery and carrots and onions and things like that from what you get at the store. Hey, Patrick, thank you for that super chat donation. Learning dehydration, canning, and freezing techniques from my videos helped me deal with my surplus. Great idea. And actually, many of the preserving methods that I use, I became better at because of exactly what you're talking about, Pat. I didn't always plan in the years in the past for preservation as a reason for my growing. And then I would have the harvest and there'd just be too much. And I had to revert to that mindset of, oh, I can preserve this rather than throwing it in the compost pile or giving it all away. And so, yes, that's a great catalyst for learning how to preserve your harvest, be it dehydrating or canning or freezing, whichever method you prefer. Don't forget pickling and jelly making as well. I use those as a fallback for when I have too much. This year, I am planning, for instance, to make rhubarb jelly. I love rhubarb jelly, and I'm planning to make a video on it. And this is the first year that I'm going to be harvesting my rhubarb along with my asparagus. I'm hoping to get enough asparagus to do some pickled asparagus. So that's part of my plan for this year that started 3 years ago when I put the rhubarb and the asparagus in place. This year, I'm planning on making a lot of tomato sauce, and I'm planning on freezing tomatoes, and I'm planning on freeze-drying tomatoes, but a lot of it is based on how many tomatoes I actually get. And so while my plan calls for saucing and freezing and freeze-drying in particular, if I get as many tomatoes as I could potentially get, I may end up making some tomato jams. and I may do some more experimenting with pickling of tomatoes. I tried that last year. Really didn't like the results too well. But that's the idea. If you have more than you expect, even with a plan, modify the plan and add some of those preservation methods into it. So thanks, Pat. That's a great suggestion. I'm glad that my videos have helped you with that. And there's also more videos to come. I'm going to be doing more of those preservation videos through this year. I think I've mentioned already, I'm just dying to release it. I really like the video of making the pepper sauce, hot pepper sauce this last year. So this last year, I grew peppers for the intent of making hot pepper sauce. Turned out fantastic. Made a video about it, but of course, by the time I went through the whole process, it was November, almost December by the time that was all done, and nobody watches videos in December, especially a video on how to make a hot pepper sauce. So I'm holding it in the library for release until people are actually growing peppers, and then it's going to come out. So that's a big reason why I'm growing so many peppers this year, is because last year I just loved making that pepper sauce. That's a method of preservation. It's a method of using your harvest, and that's influencing directly my plan for this year. So something to think about along those lines. Cass makes stuff. I hope my great-grandmother's rhubarb plant produces enough for me to make jelly. I've never had it. I always just chomp on the rhubarb raw. So chomping on it raw is a great way to eat it if you like that flavor. It's definitely a zing in the mouth. The rhubarb jelly, and that's why I want to make a video about it, because the key is juicing the rhubarb. And I use my steam juicer, and it's just an incredible color. It's clear, and it is just fantastic. So I hope your rhubarb gives you some jelly as well, because it is. It's one of those things that I haven't. Let's see, it's been 4 years since I made rhubarb jelly, and I'm looking forward to it this year. It's one of those things that I really like. Dwayne's asking, does dehydration affect the nutrient quality of fruits and vegetables? Yes, it does, but it's determined by how you dehydrate. So if you use a dehydrator that is on a low heat, and that heat is what's dehydrating your food, you are losing some of the nutrients. Vitamin C in particular is the one that dissipates most quickly in a hot environment. And the flavor is affected. Now, since I got my freeze dryer a few months back, and I've been freeze drying all kinds of stuff, freeze drying works a different way. And so when you dehydrate through the freeze drying process, you don't lose as many of the vitamins and the nutrients, and the flavor stays much closer to the original. So a dehydrator, you will lose some of the nutrient quality, where freeze dryer, you're not losing very much of the nutrient quality. There's a little bit, but completely different methods, and the results are also different. So when I'm dehydrating these days, most of my dehydrating is with the freeze dryer, because I can notice the difference. The flavor is just so much more intense and so much better. And as I look into the research a little bit more, the nutrients are better in that freeze drying. So that's an option. But if you don't have a freeze dryer, don't have an option to get a freeze dryer, regular dehydrating, or like with my herbs, I don't put my herbs in the dehydrator because that heat does affect their flavors more. I air dry my herbs, and air drying, also a method of dehydrating, helps keep those nutrients and flavors intact a little bit more than putting them under the heat. But dehydrating is a fantastic method of preservation for a lot of the things that we're growing. Even with that little bit of nutrient loss, it's better to eat something from your garden that you dehydrated and accept it's not quite as nutritious as if it was fresh, than to just not have that option in the cold winter months because you didn't do that dehydrating. So something to always think about when you're going to use it and how you're going to use it, and determining what the method's going to be for that preservation. So Sherry says, my Excalibur dehydrator can go down to 90 degrees Fahrenheit and it's more the movement of the air during the job. Yeah, I've got the Excalibur dehydrator, and that's one reason why I prefer it, because you've got a wide range of temperature control, and the air circulation does make a difference. And especially for those tender plants, if you can dehydrate on a very low temperature, it reduces the loss of those vitamins and those nutrients that might be in that. So okay, I'm going to scroll up a little. Oh, there you go. Riverdale saying strawberry rhubarb pie, one of my favorites. Yeah, the plot that I've got my rhubarb in is just a mere feet away from my strawberry patch. And that's part of what I've done, 20 years now at least. I grow strawberries and rhubarb together for the intent of making strawberry rhubarb pie. Now, quite honestly, I like rhubarb jelly better than strawberry rhubarb pie, and that's why most of my rhubarb has gone to make jelly in the past. But putting the strawberries from your own garden and the rhubarb from your own garden together to make a pie is really fantastic. And that's one of those things I do as part of my planning. When I put everything together, it is for a purpose, for the preservation at some point in the future. It's all the plan. It's all part of the plan as to whether it comes together or not. Dusty Flat says strawberry rhubarb jam. Yep, absolutely made that too. It's fantastic. Mom made great jam. Have to do it. Hope you do it this year, because that's one of those things, like I was talking about in that recent video, of the plants I choose in my garden and a memory of that plant and how it fits into what I think about as I look back over the years. Well, things like making the jam is a big part of that. Not just the plant or the harvest, but what your mother or grandmother or some friend had done in the past that you remember. Yeah, recreate that in your garden. Absolutely. Now, if you're growing something new, for instance, we're talking rhubarb. If you've never grown rhubarb before and you're not sure how it's going to do or if you're going to like it, go ahead and grow more rhubarb. This is one of those situations. Can you have too much rhubarb? Yeah, you can. It's not used in a lot of dishes. It's very limited in its uses. You might not even like rhubarb after you start growing it. And if you have more than one plant, then you probably have too much rhubarb. But if it's something that you do like and you want to make rhubarb or strawberry rhubarb jam or pie, something where you think you're going to need a lot of rhubarb, then put more plants in. If at some point you discover you've got too much rhubarb growing, it's going to be years in the future, yeah, go ahead and dig one out. You might be able to repot it and move it. That's what I do. The rhubarb I grow now is the same rhubarb I've been growing for years. I just pot it up when I moved to a new garden and put it in the garden, wait a few years, and then start harvesting it again. So when you're trying something new, I suggest you start small with just a plant or two. But if you're growing a plant with the intent of needing a lot of that plant, oh yeah, go ahead and start big. And then you have to do the analysis of if it's too much or not enough. And you're the only one that can answer that question. You can plan all you want, but until you get in the moment, it might not be enough. I've got 2 rhubarb plants, and that's what I've found works best. At my last house, I had 3 rhubarb plants. And I discovered that three rhubarb plants was great. But when I had that much rhubarb, it really forced me to use rhubarb and to make all that jelly and all that jam. And it got to the point that I got tired of the rhubarb because I just had so much of it. So that's my sweet spot. 2 rhubarb plants is ideal for me in my garden. And I discovered that because I found out 3 was too much. 1 plant too much may be the limit when you're talking about those kind of plants. Sherry's asking, I'm going to be using extra high raised beds, 32 inches, and want to put in horseradish. What would be a good companion plant? So I actually have my horseradish growing in one of those metal tubs, and I've got chives growing in it. I've got chives on one end and garlic chives on the other end. Both of those are perennial plants. Both have very similar growing conditions, and they're happy together. So right off the bat, that's what I'm doing, is putting chives in with my horseradish. Now horseradish, the roots can get quite big, they can get quite deep, and so a shallow rooted plant is one that I would recommend, and that's where chives come in. They have a fairly shallow root system, and any other plant that kind of falls into that category would work too. But you can easily grow lettuce and spinach. You know, think of it as a single season kind of crop. I like not working real hard, so that bed is done. It's got chives, it's got horseradish. I mulch. I just chopped down all the leaves this last week. So it's all mulched. It's already, the crown is just starting to appear, and the chives aren't growing yet, but I'll water that bed, they'll grow, I'll harvest, and that's all the work I have to do for that horseradish bed. I like easy. There are a lot of other herbs. Think about why you're using the horseradish. And so I like to use my horseradish fresh, grated on a nice grilled steak. To die for. So you dig up a root, you grate it on a steak. Well, how else are you seasoning that steak? I love thyme, the herb, on my steaks as well. Or more often, I'll sprinkle the thyme on the garlic bread that I've made to go with the steak. I don't have thyme in my horseradish bed, but that's another example of a companion plant that has very similar growing conditions, but also you're using them for the same reason. That's why my chives are growing, because when I make a grilled steak, I often have a baked potato, and I like to chop up my chives and sprinkle it on the baked potato. So if I go out to that bed to harvest horseradish, I also harvest the chives, bring them into the house, and then I got the chives on the baked potato, and I got the horseradish on the steak. If you think along those same lines, that can help you decide what is the best plant to grow in a bed of horseradish. If you're just looking to fill the space, yeah, do something like lettuce or spinach. That will be done by the end of the season. But if you're looking for a theme to the bed, then go ahead and look at some of those herbs and plants like chives that might fit well. So hope that works. So Rachel says horseradish has few combative plants, and so yeah, there's a lot that gives you a lot of options when you work in that regard. Absolutely. Sonia's asking, what's a good companion for asparagus? So I differ a bit. You'll see videos, you'll see suggestions on companion plants for asparagus, and asparagus is one of those plants easily could last 20 to 25 years in your garden. And over that time, it'll fill the space. And so I'm personally, this is the way I garden, I don't look for companion plants for horseradish, because I'm planning on my horseradish filling the bed. And particularly when they're very small, I don't want anything else interfering with the spreading out of the asparagus. Now, that being said, it's going to take a few years before the asparagus has spread to the point that another plant would interfere. And typically we are planting those asparagus roots 6 to 8 inches deep. And so kind of the same idea like we were just talking about with the horseradish. You can plant in between those young asparagus plants a shallow rooted plant. And so it falls into the same idea. The salad crops tend to be shallow rooted, the lettuce, those kind of things. And so that's one option. You could also, I haven't done this, but I think it's not a bad idea, is grow peas, grow legumes in a bed like that. The perennial beds we have can be depleted of nitrogen fairly quickly. And so if we can build the soil and put nitrogen back into it, it's a pretty good idea. And So with the asparagus, if you were to grow something like peas or beans in between the asparagus plants for the purpose of improving the soil, I think that's a great idea. Now, what you need to do is not let those peas and beans flower or seed, because as those root nodules are collecting the nitrogen, working with the bacteria, taking the nitrogen from the air and putting it on those root nodules, if you allow those peas and beans to develop flowers and then set pods, the plant is using all the nitrogen. So what you do is you grow a plant like that and then cut off the top as the flowers, or before the flowers are starting to develop, and that's a good way to improve the soil in an asparagus bed. So for me, I'm not worried so much about using that space in the asparagus bed, but the idea of maybe putting a cover crop with a shallow root or something like legumes to put nitrogen in the soil would be the companion approach that I would take in an asparagus bed. So, Carol M is a new member of the Gardener's God channel. Thank you, Carol. Appreciate that. Look for some of those perks. I know in the last couple of weeks we've had some new members, and one of the best things about being a member of the channel is our private Facebook page, and I haven't seen any of our new members trying to get onto the Facebook page. So hope to see you there soon, Carol, because it's a great group and we share a lot of information. A lot of questions are answered, not always by me. I let a lot of the other members answer and show pictures and do a lot on that group, and they're saying what I would be saying in most cases. So it's a really good opportunity for you to learn from a lot of experienced gardeners from around the world. So thanks for joining the channel, and hope to see you on the Facebook page as soon as we can get you there. Okay, let's see. DLR978 says, I'm excited to grow horseradish for the first time this year. Make sure you grow it in a container that it can't escape. The first time I grew horseradish a little over 20 years ago, I grew it in a raised bed. It was a 12-inch high raised bed. I thought that would be enough, and the roots escaped, and it started taking over the area around that bed. And I had to spend a lot of time digging up the horseradish outside that bed because I thought 12 inches would be enough to contain it. That's why I grow it in a fully enclosed metal tub now, because it's invasive. It can get out, especially if it's in a happy place. So have fun with it. It is great to grow. Incredible, just like everything in the garden. Incredible to harvest it and eat it fresh, but you do have to work to keep it under control, and some of those roots can get big and push their way out of even the sturdiest of beds. So go for it if you can. The Colorblind Gardener says, my YouTube account and Facebook account do not have the same email or name. How will that work? Not a problem. And so what you'll see is if you become a member on YouTube, then that gives you access, and that puts you into my system. Then when you go over to Facebook, you have to answer some questions. And one of the questions is, what is your Facebook name? And is it different? And that's not a problem. Just or what is your YouTube name? Is it different than Facebook? And so that's how I know that it's the right person that's joining this private group. Is you just, in that question answer, put in your YouTube name, and it's a piece of cake. So don't worry about that at all. It doesn't have to be the same email, doesn't have to be the same name. You just have to answer the questions. And I get people often that want to try to join the group and they don't answer any of the questions. That's the most important one that you need to focus on. And that's the one that'll get you approved to enter that group. So go for it. Piece of cake. And I'll recognize that if you are on Facebook, but then you enter in that it's the Colorblind Gardener, you're all set, good to go. So it's as easy as that. Earth Sowing with Cynthia, nice to have you here. What's the best way to add life to my container soil? And so the best way to add life is to add the things that promote life. And so I did a video on this last year where I show how I revitalize my container soil. And it's as simple as pouring the soil into a bigger container or a wheelbarrow or a tarp on the ground, and then adding more organic matter, more compost, putting some more fertilizer in, because even though I don't use fertilizers in my big garden, container gardens require fertilizer because the plants are going to be using those nutrients. And so it's as simple as that. You take the old soil, which can definitely be reused, you add more new organic material so the microbes have something to eat and more nutrients to release, and then you throw in a little bit of fertilizer. When we had Charles Malky on a couple of weeks ago with IV Organic, he's got the 222 and the 333 fertilizers. I'm using the 333 fertilizer in my containers almost exclusively because it also has azomite in it. It also has other nutrients like the calcium and the magnesium, and it's a nice fertilizer that I like using. And so that's how I am revitalizing my container soil this year and into the foreseeable future, is taking what's already there and then just boosting it and then putting it back in the container. So it's as simple as that. That's what I consider to be the best way to your question. There are other options. You can use mulches on top. You can use liquid fertilizers. I prefer to actually get the ingredients into the soil, which is why I get it all mixed up. But if you don't want to take it out of the container, then you just need to look at other ways to add the organic matter from the top, and you can just do some side dressing, just scratch it into the surface, do some fertilizers on top with an organic mulch. And it takes longer, but over time, that'll help revitalize the soil as well. Colorblind Gardener's a new member. Thanks for joining. I hope to see you soon on the Facebook group. That's awesome. So nice to have you here. And thank you, Prepper Chris. That's one of the nice things about this group. Like Prepper Chris says, welcome. It's such a welcoming group of people throughout the Gardener's God channel. But when we get the opportunity to do some of these channel membership things, those extra perks, it is such a welcoming group, such a wonderful set of gardeners. I'm so glad to be part of your world and to share our time together. It really does make a difference. So thanks so much. Jay Dixon says, please also note that IB Organics has been supporting various small gardening channels. Yeah, Charles is just an incredible guy. And you know, it's a business and he sells his products, but I've been involved with 2 other channels recently, doing live streams and doing some chats with them. And on both of those channels, IV Organics is a sponsor. Now he's not a sponsor for my channel. You know, we're friends, and you know, I try to help him out because I think his products are good, and so he doesn't need to sponsor my channel, but he is sponsoring financially some of these other small channels that are trying to become more successful on YouTube. So thank you for pointing that out, Jay. Jay, I don't know how you get any sleep. Jay is a moderator on so many live streams of other channels, and when I go to someone else's live stream, if she's not a moderator, she's often there commenting, and so you're just fantastic. So that's how she knows that IV Organics is involved with these other channels, because Jay is involved with an awful lot of these channels as well, helping them as a moderator and promoting those small channels as well. So I'll throw the thank you back to you, Jay, because I think you're doing a great job with a lot of that kind of stuff. And there's Garden State Gardener. Hey, Joe, I was talking earlier about being on your show yesterday, and Charles is such a great guy. So there's Joe from the Garden State Gardener channel, recognizing that as well. And check out the Garden State Gardener channel. His Fun Day Sundays show was the one that I was on yesterday, and he's got a lot of those from the past as well with other guests. And Joe's another one of those great guys who just gives and has contests and prize giveaways all the time. So there's another smaller channel that I suggest you check out. So Mike's love for music. is a new member as well. Thanks. Nice to have you part of the group as well as a channel member. That's fantastic. We're having a great day. And so Rachel, I agree with you. Jay's an excellent moderator. We're blessed to have you with a nice big heart. Thanks so much for that. And Heidi, of course, is right on top of things. I don't see Heidi in as many other groups, but between Heidi and Jay, no doubt, I've got the best moderators on all of YouTube. So it's fantastic to have you both here on such a regular basis. Ultimate Gardening, I was involved with his channel last week. So Emmanuel had a nice interview with me on his channel, and so nice to see you here as well. He says, getting ready to plant summer crops in South Florida. How's everything, Gardener Scott? Everything's going great. So I'm far from doing my summer crops outside, but as I mentioned earlier, I got, well, let's see, I did an entire flat, 72 cells of my peppers and 11 different varieties. Now that's nowhere close to what Joe is doing on the Garden State Gardener channel, but that's a lot. So for me, in addition to those super hot peppers, that's already happening. They're sown, and I'm just waiting for them to grow. Also got a few tomatoes growing, and a video coming out here in a couple days. We'll talk about how I did that. And then I've got tomato plants growing in both my grow tent and my hydroponic system. And I've got lettuce growing in my hydroponic system. And I've got some lettuce and basil growing in my grow tent. So even though right now it's snowing outside and it's below freezing, I'm actually really enjoying that. I've got some plants and can look forward to a harvest here probably before I can get the other plants outside. So things are actually going great. Thanks for asking, Emmanuel. I appreciate that. Ladies Garden and Home is a new member as well. Nice to have you as a member. So yeah, all of you definitely check with the Facebook group and then take a good look at the perks, because there are different perks at different levels. And for those of you that are at the training of the collaboration level, we do the members only live streams as well in addition to this one. And so that's always a nice thing. I like to have fun with those as well. So the Happy Gardener, yeah, Joe does crack me up with 600 plus, not 600 plants, 600 varieties of plant. That's the part that just amazes me. I've had 600 tomato plants growing in the school garden at Galileo, but I was only growing maybe 30 to 40 varieties of those plants, because I would grow multiple plants of a particular variety, but to grow 600 varieties is just mind-blowing to me. So it's, again, like I started the show with, is that too much? For many of us it is, but Joe's got the energy to make it happen and does a lot of giveaways with what he's doing. And so I look forward to the day when Joe announces that he's doing 1,000 varieties of peppers. That will not surprise me at all. And even that is probably not going to be too much. So absolutely craziness when you talk about some of the things we're doing. Bohemian Herbology says, going to have to type Gardener Scott interview into the search and get caught up. I find a lot of great new channels by association. Oh, that's a good idea. I haven't even thought about that. Yeah, I've done at least 6 different interviews with different channels in the last few months. And it is a great way. I do the same thing. So we had Enoch Graham on the show a few weeks back. He's doing his live stream podcast. And every week he does a highlight of small channels. And he also does a highlight of Instagram gardening channels. And I've been discovering some new stuff that I didn't know was out there at all because of a channel like that is promoting some of the smaller channels. So just in the last 3 or 4 days, I've discovered channels that I didn't even know were out there. Today, I started watching some videos from Chicago Gardener. And in all the videos I watched and all the channels I watched, this was the first time that Chicago Gardener was in my feed. And so far, I think I like her channel. So I've got to watch some more videos. Who knows? I may add her to my list when I start featuring specific channels in the future. So yeah, that's a good way to get to see the other channels out there, is to spread your wings and fly to some of those channels that you might not normally see. And that's why I like to do the interviews, and I like to help out channels, because it just helps that whole gardening world spread. And if I can be the seed for you to find a channel that is a new favorite of yours, I'm all for it. So you may be wondering, just want to talk about it for just a couple seconds, the background I have today. I wanted to take a picture of my garden this morning and show you all the work I've been doing. All my beds are prepped. They've all been amended. Mulch is in place. I'm ready to put plants in, but it snowed this morning. And I told you last week I wasn't doing any more snowy pictures as we move into the springtime. And so this is a picture from my garden towards the later part of last year. And it makes me smile. And it's that thought that sometime in the months ahead, my garden's going to look green and lush again, just not today. So this is an older picture, but I didn't want to show you the cold, frozen expanses of my garden. I wanted to show you something a little greener, and that's why I went with the background today. So Happy Gardener says, I'll have to look up Chicago Gardener. I love following people that live in crappy, cold climates like me. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and one of the things, as I started looking at some of her videos, and this is what I like. This is why I like to highlight some of these small channels. She gardens on a rooftop in containers. And so there aren't a lot of channels from the frozen north of the United States, and there are fewer channels that are doing container gardening exclusively. And so that's why I was a little excited to find a new channel with something so incredibly different in my mind. Container gardening on a roof in Chicago. I love it. And so there's a lot of lessons there, and I have no idea if she's ever watched any of my videos or even knows who I am, but that's not the point. The point is that I want to watch more of her videos and see what she has to say about container gardening on a rooftop. So yeah, check her out, Happy Gardener, and she may get a big influx of views and subscribers after we talk about her today. And I've never talked to her. I haven't made any comments. It's just one of those happy moments this morning that I thought I might have discovered something kind of fun and exciting. So let's see. Sith, I've been really enjoying regenerative gardening on YouTube, a small channel with a lovely lady full of useful information. So there's a good suggestion, another one to go ahead and check out. Let's see, Mike's Love for Music. I love that title. Ran out of indoor seed starting space, so I had to buy a small greenhouse. Excited to put it up soon. Yeah, that's one of those things I wanted to talk about as part of today's topic, is that this happens to most of us when we get the bug and we become so passionate about gardening, is we grow too many plants. It happens. We start too many seeds. We have too much germination, like I already talked about. The average person, and I use that term loosely, the average person would say, you've got too many plants, get rid of the plants. And so you start pulling the plants, plucking the plants, pinching off the plants, cutting the plants to get rid of the plants, because while they're still in your grow room or on your table or on your windowsill, you recognize, I've got too many plants. So you just get rid of some of the plants. But no, that's not the way gardeners think. We put too many seeds in and get more germination than we expect. And rather than get rid of some seeds that maybe cost us a few dollars, we decide that getting a greenhouse is the better solution. So I love that. And my greenhouse, yeah, that was part of my reasoning for getting a greenhouse. When I harden off my plants, because I always grow more plants than I anticipated, and all my plants need to be hardened off before they go in the garden, it's an effort. You know, I spend a full week hardening off my plants, and my dining room table is covered with plants as I take them out during the day and bring them in at night, and then take them out the next day and then bring them in at night. And so rather than cut down on the number of plants I'm growing so I don't have to work as hard when I harden them off, I got a greenhouse. So I can put those plants in the greenhouse and let Mother Nature harden off a little more effectively as I protect those plants from some of the nighttime cold and the wind that we have during that season that they're being hardened off. So I absolutely feel you, Mike, that getting that greenhouse is obviously the next step when you're growing more plants than you were growing in the past. So good luck with your greenhouse. I'll be making more videos on using my greenhouse in the months ahead as I do use it more and more. And so I'm doing some construction in it now, and of course you'll see that in a video. And it took me 30 years to get a greenhouse. By the time I planned for it and budgeted for it and then finally got it. And so it is, for many of us, a natural progression. If you've got the space and you've got the time, and of course you can fit it into your budget, even if it takes years like me to fit it into the budget, it can make a difference for that overflow, for those extra plants. But of course, what's going to happen if you like your greenhouse and you figure out how to use it, you're going to end up getting into that situation that not only is your grow space overloaded with plants, but then your greenhouse gets overloaded with plants. And then what? Move to another house? I actually know some people that have done that. They moved to the bigger house because they've run out of space. They just got into the gardening so much. So something to think about. Exactly. Kathy Burns says, build more builds. Absolutely. That's absolutely the bug I've got. I love building more to fit the things I'm wanting to fit, and that leads to more builds. But that's one of the reasons that I like to do it. It's just, in fact, I think it was on Emmanuel's conversation that we had, was asking what I like about gardening, and that was my answer. Is I like the building. I like the designing and planning and the building of the garden. That's where I get my most enjoyment, so that I can then sit back and just enjoy what I've accomplished. And so if I don't have a space to build, then I kind of get antsy. And that is, when I say I know gardeners who have moved to a bigger place, well, I'm actually talking about myself, because in some of my older videos, you can see my last house. And I had a relatively small garden. I didn't have a lot of space to expand. And so as I really started getting into YouTube and making videos and recognizing that I really cared more about gardening than I was willing to admit in the past, that was a big reason why I chose the land that I have now with this house. And I told my realtor that the property, the amount of space I had, was more important than any other aspect. So as we were looking at houses, the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, the square footage really wasn't the main reason. I bought this house because, as you can see behind me, I've got a big plot of land to just garden until the day I die. And that's why I moved to this house. And hopefully that's many, many years ahead. House is fine. It works great. But I spend a lot of time outside. So it just means I got to build more stuff, which I like to do, which means I got to grow more stuff, which I like to do, and then get to talk about whether I have too much. And it's hard to reach that point if you really like what you're doing. Sonia says, I try to keep some seeds germinating. I'm south. When I get an empty spot, I fill it ASAP. Better than weeds. Full beds seem to work great in the heat. Oh, absolutely. If you're growing in a hot region, you should have your soil covered by plants all the time. It helps keep the soil from drying out. It really helps shade the ground so the soil life is vibrant, and it also helps all the plants in that bed as well, because they can shade each other and they share through the transpiration. The moisture levels are a little bit higher, and that helps keep things a little bit cooler. So you're definitely on to the right track. Try to avoid empty spots when you're growing, because weeds will find that spot. Mother Nature likes to fill empty spots with plants. And if you don't put a plant in, then Mother Nature will, and it'll be a weed. So fill that empty spot right away with something else. That's a great idea. Hi, Jay. My current tiny home was bought based 50% on decision of established lush gardens. There you go. Jay's after my own heart. There's something about getting that garden and the lush garden space, as Jay says. Absolutely. Stony Gardener says, I contemplated buying the neighbor's house and tearing it down for a giant garden if I ever come into extra cash. You know, that at the last house, that was a factor. We had our lot, and the person we bought the house from owned the vacant lot behind us. And as part of our contract, we had right of first refusal on that property. So if he ever decided to sell it, we had first rights to buy it. And that was a factor, exactly like you're saying. One of the reasons that I liked that house was because of that potential that I would have a whole extra lot to expand my garden into. The reality was that he never intended on selling that lot and wasn't going to do it, and I was never going to get that space. So that was one reason why it was relatively easy for me when I started looking at houses to move to the house I'm at right now, because I know I would never be able to expand. That's kind of disheartening when all you want to do is build a garden and you hit the limits of what you can do. So I get you. Maybe the neighbor's house getting torn down is in your future. You never know. Or turn the house into something for another purpose and just use the space around to grow all the things that you want to do. Sherry Ellison's, what's your take on solar lights around the garden? I like to walk my dog at night. I'm concerned about coyotes moving into the area. So I like the idea. I've been planning that actually for this year. As I start putting in some pathways in my garden space, I want to put lights along those pathways. And so I am planning on doing that. I like solar lights in the garden because it's a different way to see your garden. And especially on those warm summer nights when you can sit outside. I love sitting outside and looking at the stars and the bats as they fly by, and I've got an owl that I can hear at night that it often makes his presence known. I like doing that. But to have some lighting, not everywhere, but in selective areas of your garden, I personally like that. And so when I do that, of course, you'll see a video about it, and I'm headed in that direction. When you have something like coyotes, that does raise an entirely different issue, and you have to be the one to determine if the lights will keep the coyotes away or will invite the coyotes, because depending on where you put them and how you use them, either of those could happen. I think adding lights that are bright enough that they might deter the coyotes could be a viable option. I've got coyotes that'll prance up and down the street from time to time. I've never seen any indication of coyotes coming into my yard, and I have a solar powered spotlight in my front yard, and I think that's one of the reasons that my front yard is pretty well lit at night, and I don't have coyotes coming into my yard. But I have seen them go into my neighbor's yard across the street who doesn't have lights. So don't know if that helps you in your decision making, but the solar lights that they have now really can give you some opportunity in beautifying your garden, and maybe even also helping to keep some pests away, whatever those other pests happen to be. And so Joni says, yes, exclamation point. I have a few solar lights in my garden too. So there you have it. It's one of those things that I think more and more people are starting to discover it. It's an issue. You don't see a lot of videos on YouTube about nighttime in the garden because I think a lot of people don't think about the nighttime in the garden. Well, I want us all to be thinking about that, which is why I want to start moving in that direction. And maybe more people will have lights. At the last house, I built a big pergola and ran electrical wiring out to it and had it lit. And it was fantastic. It was just set up above my vegetable garden area, but it was right next to other plants. And it was so wonderful to go out to that sitting area, grill up some dinner, and then I put plantings, flowers and shrubs around that whole area that I had constructed. And it was just an outdoor garden space that was fantastic to use. Here in Colorado, can't use it for very much of the year, but when we could use it, it really was fantastic. So Space Girl fenced garden is 7,000 feet, and there's half an acre for field crops. I think you've got space for a lot more plants, so you better get on it. And Imlo 422 says, my motion activated lights scare the rabbits, which is a nice bonus. Absolutely. And I think the lights in my background also help keep the rabbits away. They're motion activated as well. Mala can set them off. And so I think between the lights and between Mala, my rabbit problem has pretty much gone away. I haven't seen any signs of rabbits in my backyard this year. And there's a lot of the reasoning to the lights and the Mala being the reason for that. Nick from Yuma, hello to you. Can or should I reuse seed starting mix that a seed didn't germinate in? Absolutely. I do it all the time. In fact, some of the pepper, so I potted up all of those super hot pepper seeds that I germinated a month or so ago. And like I said, I had about a 90% germination, but that means 10% of those didn't germinate. I did it in a 72 cell tray. So I filled the whole tray with seed starter mix. And of those I didn't sow, I only did the 4 of the 10. So I only sowed 40 seeds in a 72 cell and got a little more than 30 that germinated. I then went ahead after I potted up those seedlings and reused all of that. I just filled in the cells that I hadn't used or that I had taken the plant out of. And then went ahead and all those other that either didn't get germination or didn't have a seed in it, that's what I used to germinate the other 72 pepper seeds that I was talking about recently. So yeah, I've already done that. And at the end of the seed starting, if I have a cell like that where maybe I've started 72 and only 60 germinate and I pot up, I'll dump that soil into my little green tub of seed starter mix and add more seed starter mix and just keep going. So absolutely, unless you discover you've got a problem with the mix, go ahead and keep using it. Now my mixes are either peat and perlite or cocoa core and perlite, and so they're sterile. There are no diseases, there are no issues, and I reuse them all the time. And kind of like plants, can you ever have too much potting mix? Well, I always end up having more potting mix than I need. I keep it in my tubs. Sometimes it sits there for months before I use it again. If I have some of the old cells that are now dried and just sitting and taking up space, I dump that into the same tub and it just gets mixed and I keep using it. So yeah, you don't think you need to use fresh stuff all the time. It's a great way to save money in gardening if you can reuse what you have and just add more to it so it stays nice and nutrient rich, because that's usually the issue that happens. With a seed starter mix, I'm not worried about the nutrients. I'm just want to make sure that I've got enough so that if I want to start plants right now, I always have a tub of seed starter mix. And that's kind of the way I approach it. And some of it's old, some of it's new, I don't know. It's been all mixed together and it seems to be working out fine. Kevin Cartwright, planning on building a small wildlife pond near my garden around 6 feet by 10 feet. Are you planning to install a pond this year? Love to see what you do. So I'm not planning on doing a pond. We are still under severe drought conditions. And so I'm not going to do a pond where the water is going to be evaporating, because that's just not a good idea for my garden. I am planning to do a garden feature. Now, I think for each of the last 4 years, I've done a video on the water feature. Every year, I typically do a different water feature, and then I make a video about it. So you can see what I've done already in the garden with the different types of solar powered pumps The one I did 4 years ago was actually a plug-in pump, but since then I've done solar-powered pumps. So you can see what I've done as far as a small water feature. This year I am thinking about doing a bigger feature. I did this at the Galileo School Garden, where I had a big pit that I had dug, and then I buried some water reservoirs, and then I had a pretty big structure above ground powered by a strong solar powered pump that pushed the water up, and then it cascaded over the rocks back into the buried reservoir. So it's like a hidden pond system. That's what I'm thinking about doing this year, but it really comes down to time. I've still got a lot of building that's going to go on in the greenhouse. I've got some other building projects that I'm still working on before the garden season actively hits. And so if I can squeeze in the time to dig the hole and bury the reservoirs and do the pumps and do the structure on top, then I'll do it this year. So that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if that helps you with your thoughts, but you'll definitely see it when I do it. And I'm moving towards a more permanent structure. This last year in particular, I did the video, very simple bubbler fountain into some rocks and stones for the birds and the butterflies and the bees, and Mala ate the pump. So she found the wire and pulled it out and chewed on it, and so I'm trying to look for a more permanent structure that my mischievous garden dog is not going to chew on, and that's why I want to go with something that's buried and completely enclosed. So we'll see. But I do like water features in the garden, and I do like to do a new feature every year. And of course, I like making videos about it so that you all can get an idea of options when it comes to the water in the garden. So there's some thoughts. So I've kind of talked about it throughout today's show, and I've used some of you as an example, Joe in particular. I think that sharing is just one of those aspects that we gardeners do better than the average person. We're nice people. And so if you find yourself in that situation where you have too many plants, give some away. It's easy. It's one of those things that I've got way more pots than I need. Well, the reason I have a lot of pots is because I'm planning on growing a lot of plants, and I'm planning on giving a lot of those plants away. That's just what I do every year because it makes me feel good to share my gardening with somebody else through the plants that I started from seed in my little basement grow area. So think about that as definitely part of you being a gardener. You're a giving person. You probably already know that. But if you find yourself in that situation where you've got too many plants, you've got too many zucchinis, you've got too much of anything, well, go ahead and be that gardener who shares with another gardener. And then, just like I am today as I highlight some of these other people that I know have been sharing what they do, that person is going to see you as a giver, and it'll probably encourage them to become a giver too. And can you imagine how wonderful not just the gardening community, but the world would be if all of us were in that mindset of all we want to do is be a giver? I just think it's fantastic. And that's why I want you to start thinking about the number of plants you have, because it's normal that we are selfish and we start our plants from seeds and we want all of our plants to go in our garden and we want all those plants to grow. And then at the end of the season, we find out we had too many plants. Well, maybe you can shift a little bit. And at the beginning of the season, think, man, I can't imagine that I need all of these plants. It's going to be too much work if I have all these plants in my garden. Who can I give them to? So think about that as we move forward. Intentionally grow more plants to give away. Or if you discover you got too many plants, just give them away. It'll make you a better person, and it'll make the other person, the recipient, a better person as well. Yankee Sister Homestead, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to see you as well. Thank you for that super chat. It's great chatting and watching. I know it works both ways, and you make my Mondays complete. I just love seeing you here. And look for an email from me in the days ahead, because there's something I want to share with you, good old Yankee Sister Homestead. So I was going to send you an email a couple days ago, but then I thought I'd wait till after this show and send you an email either tomorrow or Wednesday. So it's coming. It's exciting. It's a secret. We'll talk about it in the months ahead. And all the rest of you who are wondering, what's he got? What's he thinking? I'll share it with you probably in the month of May. See, I'm planning ahead. And a lot of it has to do with what I think gardening is all about. And the plan is an important aspect. Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your Monday with me. And guess what? I'll be back next Monday to do it all over again. And I hope you're here to share the time as well. Get out there, even if it's cold and snowy. Try to get out and enjoy your garden. If you're enjoying the warmth and the sunshine, and get out there and get those plants growing, because that's what it's all about. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.